This is a Dalarna University production.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the introduction and the inspiring speech by the Vice Chancellor. It's really is an honor for me to come here for a whole bunch of different reasons. First, when I read the conference program, I see that a lot of the topics are really of interest to me personally and to colleagues in Canada. I think we're all blazing trails along this same route, and it's always very useful for us to hear and to learn from each other. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. But I think the biggest reason why I'm really pleased to come to Dalarna University is because I'm a descendant of Lars Halvardsson from Skalo and Anders Larsson from Nordanker at Dalarna Parish. So it's the first time that I've got to come back here, and you can see this is the boat that my great-grandparents took to Hull, and then they went across to the other side of England and took a boat to Minnesota, of course, where all Swedes go. But they didn't last there. They immigrated to Canada in the early 1900s. And this is a picture of John and Greta Anderson and my grandfather in the middle there. And so when I've been thinking about this ancestral connection to this parish, it made me think, well, what if they hadn't have left? And the first thing is that I realized I would look quite different. And I also realized that I would hope that my partner would be not so blank-faced as this current one is. But sadly, if they hadn't left, instead of crying at the World Juniors in my own province, which was stolen by the Swedes, because everyone knows that the World Championships, especially at the junior level, really belong to Canada forever. And so it was quite insulting. But, and the other thing, I probably wouldn't be a typical unilingual North American who can't speak Swedish or any other language very well. And finally, the good thing for you is, where else could you get a keynote speaker who could come to Falun in February and find the weather to be quite warm and delightful, actually. So I am glad to be here. One slide about the university I come from. It's Athabasca University. We bill ourselves as Canada's open university. So we have about 34,000 students, but we don't have any students on campus. So there's the old joke that school would be a great place if there were no students. Well, that's our university. So we have, we're 100% at a distance, and we have graduate and undergraduate programs. If you haven't been to Canada, I would suggest that it's a very welcoming place. There's a great quote by the Canadian Jan Martel, who says, "Canada is a great country. It's much too cold for common sense, but inhabited by compassionate and intelligent people with bad haircuts." So what do I want to get out of this presentation? What do I want you to get out of it, more importantly? I wanted you to get a sense of history and look at the past generations. And I'm going to talk about using the term distance education. And I know that in some countries and in some areas, that seems like an old-fashioned word that people are trying to get out of their vocabulary. We've sort of gone full circle, and we're back to sort of celebrating the things that we learned from particular modes of distance education, like correspondence, but we still use the term. So you can just substitute that for e-learning or mobile or any other term that you'd like, and when we talk about these pedagogies. But also, I'm going to show you a few little applications that I've been particularly impressed with, and I hope that you walk away with at least one idea that you not only use, but maybe you research in your own practice and share with others. And I often start these talks by thinking about, well, why is it that we should be interested in distance learning, e-learning, and all the alternatives that are available. And these are the three values that really drive and push my own scholarship, and I assume many of you as well. And the first is that we've got to improve education. We can be very complacent and think, well, the education that I got, it must have been great, because look at how great I am. Instead of thinking about, how could it be made better? And if you think of any other profession, if you look at doctors, engineers, lawyers, and you ask them, is the techniques you use now the same that you used 20 years ago, the same you're going to use 20 years? And they would say, oh, this is crazy, you know. Of course, we're improving all the time. But education, we seem to almost be stuck in complacency, and I think it's a real challenge for us to get over that. And the second value is that student control and students as consumers and customers is something that's very foreign and hard for us to accept the fact that students, they have more and more choices now, and we have to get used to the idea that helping them to become lifelong learners is really our goal, but that they have a responsibility and we have to help them to assume that responsibility. And finally, just the idea that continuous education opportunity is a basic human right, and it is not being made affordable to most of the citizens of this planet. And I think that we have an obligation to not only make our education quality higher, but also to reduce the costs as much as we can. So online learning is here. I was really impressed at how many students at this university are studying online. That's a phenomenon around the world. You can see the growth rates. This is stuff from the US, but I'm sure it's the same here. And the reason is that we've done research at Athabasca University, and we have found some very startling results. And basically, we found that students have learned that online learning is better than sex, and for these reasons. First of all, if you get tired, you can just stop, save your place, and pick up where you left off. Second, you can finish early without feeling guilty. Or, if you need more time, you can ask for an extension. Finally, you can get rid of any viruses you catch with a $50 program. With a little coffee, you can do it all night long. And if you don't usually get divorced if your spouse interrupts you in the middle of it. And finally, if you're not sure what you're doing, you can ask a tutor. And I think those are the compelling reasons for online learning. Thank you. So, why is online learning seriously learning for the next generation? Well, a lot of people think that you come from Canada, big country, there's lots of distance. It must be people are doing that because of the geography. But in fact, most students of distance education or online learning in Canada live in the big cities. And it's the same in Sweden, I'm sure. That it's not because of geographic distance. It's because of time, shifting, convenience, scaling, making education work within their busy lives. And quotes, I like to work at my own pace. And that's something we should remember to tell with teachers too. It gives flexibility in teaching to teachers as well as to students. But there's a big problem, and that is that online learning in the past, or distance ed, has always been associated with higher dropout rates. And there's many reasons for that. It's been studied in many ways, and I think one of the most compelling reasons, though, is that we don't really give learners the skills and the opportunities and the challenge of being self-directed learning, and often this mode of learning takes more skills and more self-direction. But some of the research is starting to show that as our students and our teachers become more used to this mode of delivery, the completion rates go up. So I think there is hope. So when we look at this next generation, we also have to look in the rearview mirror and look back in the future and past generations. So within distance education, many people, including myself, have published articles talking about the generations of distance education based on the technology. So you have your correspondence, paper-based stuff, then you have your broadcast stuff, or your TV, all that sort of thing, and then finally the web-based sort of the computer conferencing thing. But to think of oneself as being defined by the technology, it goes against the grains of almost all academics. We try to think of what really drives us is our disciplines and our pedagogical knowledge. And so I like the analogy of learning as being a dance. It's where the technology sets the beat and the timing, but it's the pedagogy that sets the moves and the way the dance evolves. And I think you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And so, some of us are, sort of have natural affinities to thinking in pedagogical terms and others in technological terms. What we need to do is develop them both so that we can create a great dance. And so I recently published an article talking about the 3 generations of education pedagogy, or distance education pedagogy. And I'm going to briefly go over those 3. And you'll see that the kind of teaching and learning that you do today probably derives from with one of these 3 generations. And the first generation started earlier, but it hasn't replaced the other the others, such that that we see models of teaching and learning going on using each of these three pedagogies, and the kind of forms of structures that evolve using those technologies are with all of us. But you'll also see from these slides that the technology is really driving a new beat in all three of these pedagogies, and it's our challenge to dance with that beat. So the first one is the behavioral cognitive pedagogies. I grew up in Calgary, which is where the Calgary Stampede, it's famous for cowboys. And with cowboys, if you know cowboy poetry, it's very simple, very direct, loving, and the kind of stuff that just speaks very simply. And there's an old phrase that teaching should be tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. And that led to sort of direct instruction where we're very clear about the explicit directions. And this kind of first generation behavioral cognitive is really important and still used a lot in training systems. I was just at a keynote last week by a US general, and he was just talking about the advances in training soldiers to work this fancy equipment and to do all sorts of games and simulations. But it was basically based on this idea that just tell them what they have to learn, make it easy, drill them, make sure they know that content. But you can't get away with cowboy humor or talk when you're into academia. So Gagne invented, the events of instruction, which sort of detail and more explicitly, you got to gain their attention, then you tell them the objectives. I'm sure if you went to teachers college the same time I did, you learned about behavioral objectives and how important they were and how you always had to have them driving everything you did. And then you go through, you elicit performance, provide feedback. And this has become the basis of instructional systems design, that if you take a graduate course in instructional design, you will basically go through these steps and turn that into a unit of instruction. But then along came the cognitive revolution, and this idea that we could ignore things that were not behavioral just started to crumble when we started realizing that motivation and attention and all these other things that were going on in the brain really had made a difference to the way people could learn. And so then we started thinking about chunking, how much content to put in a package or in a screen, and what effect that had on cognitive load and on working and long-term memory. We started learning about multiple representations as media started coming in, whether we should have pictures plus audio plus video, how many pictures before we started distracting learners, all that sort of stuff. And we also really learned about variability, which I think was really important. We started learning that people get bored if you do the same thing over and over and over again, even if it's good instructional design. So we need to basically keep their motivation up. And the sort of epistemological basis of cognitive behaviorism is that knowledge is something. It's a big thing, and all we need to do is create a way that we can take this logical, context-free, largely context-free knowledge and transmit it to students such that they can learn. And we can study that in a scientific way by discovering the relationships between the inputs and outputs. But when I love this quote from Steve Johnson, he's an American writer who talks about innovation lots, and he says, when tools of measurement increase their precision by orders of magnitude, new paradigms often emerge because the newfounded accuracy reveals anomalies that had gone undetected. And I think that's what we're starting to see with the way that the students who learn in a net-based environment, they start leaving traces of their activities, and we can start to analyze those traces, and we can start to learn how people learn even within this behavioral cognitive tradition. And as a result, students as well are becoming media consumers. So there's sites like this geteducated.com where it compares every university online, at least in North America, where students can go there and they can see the ratings of all of the courses and which ones are frauds and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, in the Web 2.0 sense, they can add their own contributions and ratings to these media as well. Other developments in behavioral cognitive system is on reflection amplifiers, where students are starting to be able to track their own progress and see, okay, here's where I was going, and here's the way I learned this sequence compared to the way most learners learned this sequence. And I can compare myself to the people who flunked the course, as well as the way the people who passed the course. And you can start to model oneself based on the traces that have been left through their digital footprints and the archives. It's so cheap now to store materials so that products that students have learned and created, they can be accessed by anybody if we make them so. And so then we get this whole idea of learning analytics, which is a very hot topic right now. We're sponsoring a conference in Vancouver in a few months at the Gates Foundation, and there's been people coming out of the woodwork. The White House is sending people to this because they're starting to realize that the black boxes of our learning management system, our registry records, our financial records, our student records. They're basically, the information goes in there, but only certain people can only get certain pieces of it out, and they usually can't understand what they see and what's coming out of it anyway. So we're starting to learn how to turn these black boxes into things like profiles and desktops and things, quite amazing stuff where the vice president of the university every morning can punch in and can see how many students attended this class yesterday, how many failed, where the teacher's progress is. And it's all very scary for a lot of academics who are used to working in black boxes. But this whole tool set is just coming open to us and challenging a lot of the way we think and do. But if we keep our eyes on improving teaching and learning, I think that there's a huge advantage because we can start to see where the students are falling off and where they're having problems. In Norway and NKI, they've got their quality barometer in real time. Every time a student submits an assignment, they rate their tutors. It just, you can see your progress daily. Everyone can see it. Again, threatening, but in terms of responding to the student needs, I think it's great. This is a Real Salado Community College in the United States. They say that within 10 days of enrollment, and they have a continuous enrollment system, they can identify those students who are likely to drop out, and then they start a whole new set of interventions focused on those students. Instead of like in distance ed, it's been, the students say just go in, you send out the materials or whatever, and they disappear until a month later when they're supposed to hand in their first assignment. And we just, we just don't know what's happening with them all the time. But all of that stuff is now becoming easy or possible for us to look at. And so they classify students as high risk, medium risk, low risk, and different responses for that. We're starting to see that this behavioral cognitive approaches, we know that students don't learn at the same pace or they have the same speed, and yet we often give them the same batch process to go through. But we're starting to see systems now that can evolve that will give a different lesson sequence to different students. And this is one tool that, again, this maybe could be used for a number of pedagogies, but I find that this has been the most useful tool for me in the last year, in that I do a lot of teach at graduate level, and we do a lot of marking papers, and I'm not a very fast typist, and so I've completely switched now. I only mark audio by talking to students, and using Adobe Connect or Adobe Acrobat, you can put this insertions throughout your essay, and I do way more, and there's been studies to show that the number of comments and the richness of the comments and the teacher presence that comes through just using voice. And so most of these innovations that we have, that we talk about, a lot of them take more teacher time. And those ones, I don't have any extra time. I don't imagine you have any extra time. So when you occasionally see an adaptation like this that actually saves time and has been shown to, to increase the students like it, and the sense of community is built by this kind of reinforcement. So I would strongly urge you to try using voice annotation if you do a lot of essay marking. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming on, like behavioral cognitive learning in a distance ed format anyways, has always been on creating learning packages and content. Content has been driving the process. Well, now all that content is becoming almost wide open. Open educational resources are exploding across the net. I looked at, there's a K-12 thing, lektion.se site in Swedish, but there wasn't much that I could find. Mind you, my Swedish is not very good, but in open educational resources in Swedish. But I imagine that everyone here has content that they've developed for their courses. And the question is, why don't we put it up? Why don't we license it under a Creative Commons license and allow us to work with it? And again, that's another scary proposition, but I remember talking to a vice chancellor at an Indian university who was forcing all of his teachers to put their content online. And he said, it isn't because I think our content is so great. In fact, I think it's very bad. And I think if they have to put it online, then it will improve. And so that's what he was doing. This is the cost of this content. We've defined ourselves in this behavioral cognitive world, at least in distance ed world, by the quality of the content, the quality of those open educational courses. But look at the cost of content. This is when Microsoft developed Encarta, their English language encyclopedia. They did focus groups way back in the 1980s, 90s, when they asked people, how much would you pay for an online encyclopedia that was just as good or better than Encyclopedia Britannica, which was selling, for $4,000 or $5,000 at the time. And they found out that their consumers were willing to pay $1,000 for that encyclopedia at that time. Then when it was finally released, it was released, I think, in 1993 at $250, and by the time they discontinued it in 2009, they were giving the encyclopedia away. So you just see a curve, and that's happening for all people who, if you define yourself by your content, your value is going down, and there's no chance that it's going to go up, I believe. Look at here's Stanford giving away their iTunes stuff, MIT, their open educational courses that they've been giving away, and even this is an American outfit called Great Courses, and they go around recording lectures from really world-class scholars in many disciplines. And a whole course, they used to cost $300 or $400, but now they're trying to sell them at 80% off, and they still can't find any buyers. So we're in trouble if you think that, because most of us just like free. That's the price we want to pay. So speaking of free, this is a book series that I edit, and there's 5 books that are listed there, but now there's 6 of them out, and there's 2 more that are in process. But these books are produced by Athabasca University Press, and we're Canada's first open access press, and that means that every book that we publish, you can download the whole book for free, or individual chapters of it if you want. You can also pay it. You can also order it and get it delivered to you in paper. I love that because I get some royalties, especially this bottom one, the theory and practice of online learning. But if you want to, you can get the whole thing without having to pay any money. And if you're interested in publishing, especially in the distance education series, we're looking for new titles as well. So it comes to the problem is, why don't you use, modify, and post your open content? And the biggest problem is lack of motivation for teachers to actually use it and to contribute back. And maybe that you can talk about that in this conference. So there's many, to conclude that one, I'm only through one of the generations, but I'm going to keep blasting along here. Many ways that technologies enhance production and learning in the first generation. That first generation cognitive behavior is not dead. There's many of our courses that are still based upon that pedagogy. But then social constructivism came along. The idea that people are social animals and they learn in groups, they motivate each other, and that we can harness that group feeling to enhance learning. So these are becoming, very familiar to you if you've been to teacher school in the last 20 years. It's been a mantra of constructivism. The idea that errors and contradictions are useful and learning is active, it's not passive, and the importance of multiple perspectives so that you work in groups, so that you have to defend your ideas and you learn from other people. And in this case, constructivist learning is actually the process. It's a sort of learning is a continual conversation between the external world and its artifact. So it isn't a thing that you can sort of transport, but it's rather something that's constructed by individuals and socially in groups. So knowledge is a process of discovering, determining, developing, deploying, and then deliberating. And the most effective way that we found to do that is learners as discussions and meaning makers. And this is a model that is prevalent at many universities, especially in our upper levels where we get the class sizes down, whether it be online or face-to-face. And the effect, this has been studied for years. This is a bit dated data now, and it's from face-to-face, but I'm sure it's the same in an online context. And you can see that these effect sizes here, may not seem like very much, but they translate to 15-20% of learning improvement. But it's not only achievement that goes up. The interpersonal attraction to each other, the social support, their self-esteem goes up, the time they spend on tasks goes up, the quality of their reasoning goes up by the largest extent, and their ability to take different perspectives. So lots of compelling reasons why this generation has become so popular. And then lots of data on group learning. Students learn in small groups, demonstrate greater academic achievement. And finally, the underrepresented groups and learning related attitudes of women are supposed to be especially enhanced by this model. But technologies are coming along, and there's a huge improvements in the way social constructivist models or pedagogy works. And the most important, I think, is just collaborative tools. It's so much easier for a group of students now to get together, to synchronize time, to work on documents together using wikis or Google Docs or something like that. It used to be, I used to say that if you're going to do something at a distance, it's going to take twice as long for a group work as it does face-to-face. But it isn't so anymore. If the students are using these tools and are comfortable with them, they can actually become more productive than you are in face-to-face environment because of the time shifting that's still possible. And you can go from, it can be real time, or it can be asynchronous, or near real time, or any combination that the students want. And the benefit of social constructivism is the trust that builds up and the sense of commitment from the other students. And again, we can do that. We can have safe spaces on the net that are behind our firewalls. And we're starting to see people using avatars and body languages and enhance their learning that way. And we can start to look, using these analytic tools, at what these conversations look like. I spent a lot of my early career looking at doing content analysis, and it was very hard work and very laborious, and trying to figure out who was the leader in this group or what was happening and who are the outliers. Well, now you can get an open source tool developed at Wollongong University in Australia called Snap, and it works now with Moodle, but it soon will work with Blackboard as well. And the nice thing is, instead of getting these threaded discussions like you see at the top, it turns them into diagrams in real time. And the real beauty of this tool is you don't have to ask your computer services department to install it. This is on your side of this is a client tool. So you just do it and you don't ask anybody. You just analyze your own class. So it's really powerful that way. We're starting to see, as I said, of course, with Second Life type environments, but here we're talking about using, the Connect system instead of playing golf or tennis. You can actually use it for gesturing and for having conversations. This is another great tool that I love, Voicethread. It allows you to do video and audio and text-based interaction in asynchronous mode, which anybody can do, so that you can put up in the middle a PowerPoint slide or a map or anything you want. And then as people come in, they can click on the little diagrams of other people's contributions, and they can hear them or they can see them, depending on what the person wants to reveal of themselves. So you get an asynchronous community, and this community doesn't die at the end of the semester. It can go as long as you want. You can just keep building on knowledge instead of having it just die at the end of each term. However, despite all the good things about groups, there are problems. The big one is that they're restricted in the size of the group, in the space, the pace, the relationship. They're not open oftentimes. And that's partly because this trust needs to be built in a secure kind of environment. There's evidence that they're overly confined by leader expectation, the leader normally being the teacher, and strong institutional and curriculum control. And if we're really building lifelong learners, then we can't just give them the experience of being taught by what somebody else tells them to learn. They have to have that experience of setting their own research goals and their own learning goals. It's often isolated from the real world into an educational context, and low tolerance of internal difference, sexist and ethnicized regulation, sort of the hidden curriculum of distance education. Pathological politeness, and when we first started doing computer conferences, everyone was worried, oh, they're going to be flaming, they're going to be yelling at each other. It just doesn't happen in my classes. There's this pathological politeness. People won't confront the issues, or confront each other more likely than to flame each other. So, we really have to work at getting groups to function well online. And so constructivist learning in groups is necessary, but I still think that it's not sufficient alone for advanced forms of learning. Which brings us to the third generation, and this generation is really in embryonic state right now. it's termed by George Siemens as Connectivism. And he talks then, learning is about building capacity, so that the job of a teacher is to help learners build networks of resources and networks of other students and other resources, and both inside and outside of the academy, and then applying them to real problems. So here's a picture of George. He's now at Athabasca University, and he wrote a real seminal article, 2004, that's got a massive number of quotations and people reading and responding to it. But here's his 7 or 6 characteristics of what learning is in a connectivist term. It's about connecting specialized nodes. And he's really strong in the fact that learning might be residing in non-human appliances. So I don't like the term learning. I would think, I guess, knowledge more generally. But this is a generation, or a generation of pedagogy that is net-centric. It grew up with the net. It assumes the net is there and is ubiquitous. So the capacity to know is more critical than what is currently known. And our job, again, is to help students to form connections, to build networks between fields, ideas, and concepts, and to keep up to date. So connectivist knowledge is emergent, it's distributed, it's chaotic, it's fragmented, non-sequential, and contextualized. All of those things seem like a disaster for somebody who's trained as an instructional designer, where we're trying to drive out all of those things and make it clear. But connectivism celebrates that complexity, and so it's a challenge for us to teach and learn in this kind of a world. There is stuff, coming from emergence and chaos theory and other areas that we can apply. So knowledge is defined by its creation. So we access information, we filter it, we convey ideas, we analyze, we collaborate. And this is a great quote from Ronald Burke. He's a guy who's written an American on social capital, but he says, people who live at the intersection of social worlds are at higher risk of having good ideas. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to put our students at higher risk of having good ideas and forming networks of people who have good ideas. This is the journal that I edit, Erodal, and we just, a few months ago, last year we published a special issue on connectivism, and we also published one on emergence. And so I hope that, I didn't even put the URL down there, but if you punch into Erodal, part of the funding, this is an open access journal, so you can get it for free. And part of the funding that we get is from the Canadian government, and it's based on how many people subscribe. So I would be indebted to you if you would subscribe to this journal. And then about 4 or 5 times a year, you'll get an email from me with a table of contents and no advertising, and we'll all live happily ever after. So subscribe to Erodal. So connectivist knowledge, it's not a thing, it's not a process, it's a potential. And learners as participant creators. This is a book I just read from a Swedish scholar. He wrote it doing his PhD in the UK. I don't know, does anybody know Russell Francis? Oh, well, great book, Russell. I was hoping you might be here. Anyways, he talks about the use of Web 2.0 tools and how it's pushing our universities and challenging them, and where the evolution of our universities is going. So, and one of the basis of connectivism, if you're going to form connections, you got to know, you got to be able to see, you got to be able to find them, and that's where transparency and persistence comes in. Shared awareness allows otherwise uncontrolled groups to begin to work together, and then Stewart Kaufman, an American geographer, talks about adjacent possibilities, so that every time we make a connection with somebody new or something new, it opens up new ways for us to see something beyond that. And so the adjacent possibilities just keep growing and growing. Connectivist learning is just like gardening. You can't just throw things. You got to tend the garden, you got to water it, you got to hoe it, and then you will harvest. And one of the central ideas is about content curation, where this used to be what librarians did. Now all of us can do it, is we can, in our classes, we can develop resources of knowledge and prune them and add to them and get people to evaluate them, and we curate a small piece of knowledge. And if we all do this, make it open, make it shareable by tagging it, rating it, we'll sort of build collaborative and accessible knowledge systems. What does instructional design look like? It's in very early stages, but this is from an Italian woman who wrote about first we have to establish awareness and receptivity. People have to realize what is on the net, and they have to be comfortable and skilled at getting to it. And then we have to form connections, and we have to throw away a lot of the junk and filter it and help each other to find the most useful things. And then we have to contribute and evolve, and that's one of the fundamental things of Connectivism, is creating artifacts and putting them on the net so that you're not just consuming, you're a creator of knowledge. And then being reflective and developing metacognitive skills. So if you want to experience a Connectivism course, this is one that George Siemens and Stephen Downes are running called Change. It's been running since September. There's over 2,000 people have enrolled. It's free. And you might be interested in just going to change.mooc.ca, and you can see the kind of way that they do an open course with 2,000 people in it. It's not quite as idealistic because a lot of people enroll, but they don't do much else than actually enroll. So learning is not easy. The tools of Connectivism, you can see a lot of the Web 2.0 tools. Affordances, the ability to publicly peer critique the work of others, and again, that's part of our scholarly tradition to be critical, and I think Connectivism has a place for that. Content generation, aggregation, and building communities. How do you do this? Well, we got to motivate students. They don't naturally come, to be creators, to put things out. A lot of them have resistance and reluctance to share things. It's not quite as good as it should be. And so they have to develop their own net presence, and we have to model that and expose them to it. We need structural support from within our universities, wireless access, all that sort of thing. And we need cognitive skills. And we need to get them in this spiral of support from other people and other organizations. It's not an easy world. There's huge privacy issues in here because for some people, what for one person is their right to disseminate their freedom of speech is for another person a real invasion of their privacy. And trying to marry those two and have one kind of set of rules, well, it's impossible. And so what you have to do is have systems that allows students and yourself to create different levels of privacy for whatever it is that you're dealing with. It's very disruptive. All these Web 2.0 tools and computer services, their idea of developing a tool and making it secure and safe and versus the release early, release often mantra of the Web 2.0, there probably isn't a person in this room who hasn't had a fight with their computer services department at some time or another, and it's just part of the terrain that happens. And sustaining motivation and commitment. I love this cartoon. I used to have my own blog for a while, but I decided to just go back to pointless, incessant barking. So it's to blog regularly, to do it often. Sometimes you can kid yourself that it isn't making a difference, but I think it does. So this is the system that we're trying to put on top of our Moodle to develop a community that exists beyond the learning management system. A social network, it's based on the ELG platform, and it's a lot like Facebook, only it's on our institutional boundaries, and it's only accessible to members of the wider Athabasca community, including alumni and faculty and students. But here's the kind of permissions. Everything that I write there, I can decide who gets to see it. In this case, my contact name I'm giving away to everybody, but I can decide who gets to see my telephone number, and nobody to Google search engines and everything in between. And that system permeates throughout all the resources. And I am out of time, and so I'm not going to go through this group sets and nets for another day, and nor institutional alternatives, because I don't want to take up, but...
Actually, you have a couple of more minutes if you'd like to.
Okay. Okay, well, then let's look at a few institutional alternatives. We'll go beyond this one, though that's sometimes the way it seems at Athabasca. So we're talking about free online public education courses. That's a real threat coming along, is these first University of the People, the first tuition-free university. And they're relying on volunteers and on students. The first course you take at this university is how to learn in a network of learners, and how to contribute, how to peer critique, and sort of throwing the responsibility of learning back onto the students and minimizing the amount of direct teacher-student interaction. And that is very threatening. I've just finished writing an article on low-cost alternatives, just like we have low-cost air carriers and low-cost stockbrokers. And nobody wants to think of their university as being a low-cost deliverer, but there is a huge market for a low-cost system, and I'm challenging our university to get into that market. Badges, I guess we lost the first part of this one, but there's a whole idea of Mozilla is sponsoring this thing to have little chunks of knowledge that are recognized not by degrees or certificates, but by short-term badges, and that these employers are interested in this kind of skill level development, which I'm not suggesting is 100% what we do at universities, but it's certainly a component of it. Artificial intelligence, and when you see, these are courses, this one from Stanford, MIT X has just been launched, where they used to MIT, they give you all their courseware, but you couldn't really engage with other students, you couldn't write quizzes, it was just all on your own. Now they're going to the next level by giving you tests, and they'll give you some credit. It isn't an MIT degree, that costs megabucks and is only for the elite, but they do give you a certificate or an equivalent of some sort or another, which we'll see how that works out. Here's systems where you can start your own university. You can start charging students, you can start registering, do-it-yourself universities kind of thing. And I am just about done. So if you look at those three generations, you can map them against technology, learner activities, the learner granularity, how it's evolved, evaluated, and the scalability. I'm arguing on the right that connectivism is scalable. Constructivism, small group learning, is not very scalable, and that's a real challenge for us because that model seems to permeate. And I noticed that especially in Scandinavia, to tell you the truth. In Denmark, to learn means to talk to other people, and talking to other people is expensive in terms of time and in place. And the first generation cognitive behaviorism, it's really scalable, and that's why the 3 million people at Indira Gandhi National University, they don't sit around in small groups, let me tell you. They're using mass production systems. So recommendations for your teacher: try to be more fearless even than your students. Seek out and create opportunities to collaborate, and create a personal learning environment that really works for you, and explore, experiment, and have fun. Thank you very much.